Hey, welcome back to another episode of Stellar Origins, the podcast where we look at the past, the works of the beginnings of concepts of learning and development, and how they are today. How can we learn from those lessons to do better practices today? Hey there, welcome back. It's another beautiful Sunday. I hope you're doing great. God bless you and everything works out for you in life. I'm Alex Salas, again, your host. And today we have a very, very influential topic in training and development, corporate development, organizational development in any company, really, and especially for large organizations, enterprise organizations. And that topic is the 70-20-10 framework. So, what is that, and why do people care so much about? And first of all, is it based on any research? Because you may be surprised. To understand you may be listening to this, and maybe this is the first time you hear about the 70-20-10 framework. And really, what it is an idea of how people learn in an organization. Is presumed or is assumed by this model or framework or whatever we want to call it that 70% of the learning that happens in an organization happens informally. In other words, people are just either going through the jobs, they are accepting challenges, they are maybe not being well trained, and maybe they want to do a good job. And maybe that's why they spend 70% of the time learning from either others or experiences in the job. There's no doubt that there are experiences in the job that are going to make you learn because obviously, if you're working in a company, that company is not a copycat of any other company, is its own unique identity or entity. So there are some environmental, let's say, endemic, if we would, in terms of titles, in terms, there are some endemic conditions that you have to be aware of, that you have to become familiar with. And this is happened to you if you have more than three jobs or one job. This is happened to you time and time again. You can know what you do in your profession, but the way you do it in company A is not going to be the same as you do it in company B. Otherwise, those companies would not have any type of competitive advantage against each other. Then we have the 20%. That 20% is a social 20%. In other words, you learn by asking others for help, or you learn in collaboration with others in a group in many different ways that you can interact with other people. Makes sense. I mean, we are social animals, right? We're social entities, humans. So there are times where you're going to be talking to your boss or your manager, leader, and you're going to learn certain things from them. Obviously, because perhaps they have more experience than you, or perhaps they have that different angle, which is the angle of having been a leader or manager. And then we get to the 10%. So that 10% is about the normal stuff you usually encounter. And it's interesting because there seems to be quite a bit of bias with this 10%. The 10% is training, it's the formal training. And the idea of that, if you can think of it, I think many times the way this is sort of presented is 10% formal training, meaning you're sitting in a classroom somewhere in a conference room and there's a training. It lasts 2 to 3 days. That's technically just ILT, that's instructor led training. And that's, you know, that's the notion there, right? So 10% of what you learn in terms of what you learn in the organization comes from that. Okay, so where does 70-20-10 come from? Well, primarily it's a little bit murky, but there is a book that you can certainly find and get your references from. The 70-20-10 framework or model comes from this book that was assigned, or let's say written, in the purpose of leadership development. The book is The Lessons of Experience: How Successful Executives Develop on the Job by McCall, Lombardo, and Morrison. Now, this book is published in 1988. It's based on research that spanned for the previous 4 to 5 years, or maybe earlier as well. There's mention in the book of research dating from 1981 or so. And the focus of the book is how experience or learning by doing helped the development of senior executives. This is a key component here, senior executive talent. So we're talking about people with already leadership titles, leadership sort of development, degrees, a different caliber of employee than the brand new employee that just graduated from a bachelor's or something like that, or even a master's. So we're talking about senior executive talent. So executive talent that is being promoted or is being developed from supervisory level all the way up to directory level, VP level, and whatnot. And if you check the book out, it's actually a great. Check the links in the description on everything. Every time we do an episode, check the links in the description of the episode, and also follow our newsletter. The newsletter that I put out every week comes out here on Sundays on LinkedIn, and you can get then the link also for the episode there. You get the link to the sources, and you can check the sources for yourself. Lessons of Experience was a great book, 1988, and it basically breaks down this whole notion of how informal learning. It's quite better based on a qualitative study, pretty much, of collecting surveys. And the reason why this got started is actually pointed in the book on page 6. It says, in one lively meeting with human resource professionals from corporations that sponsor our research, we face the fair question. We don't have enough executive bench strength for the future. How can we grow enough talent to lead this company in the years ahead? So they mentioned that the question was posed to them in 1981, and therefore they started looking at research on that area. We're talking about dozens of Fortune 500 companies, and also feedback from 191 successful executives. So, what would be the problem here if you think? What is the problem in L&D with 70-20-10? Well, the problem is that then we have folks that took it in early, let's say 20, well, maybe dating back to 2010 or 2013, 2014. And they took this and created a thing called the 70-20-10 model off of this. And it now applies to every single learning intervention. So technically speaking, what some of those folks that did, and I mean, I'm not going to go into names. You can find the links, some of the links to some of the sources. There's a good notion here of several different articles out there. The main thing you're going to find about 70-20-10, though, that there isn't any research. There's no research supporting this idea of this 70% rule. The 70% rule those are good ideas, I will say. And I think is backed by the fact that if we start looking at it from a specific center of marketing to an L&D crowd, that, hey, it's learning by doing. Most people are going to agree with that. And therefore, 70-20-10 is what needs to happen. So there's a link to the revised article from the Center for Creative Leadership, because Lombardo and one of the authors, they also got help from corporate executives, since one of those corporate executives was Eichinger. So Eichinger and Lombardo are known, well, are marked as the original researchers doing this project, and they mark it down. And I mean, they did this work in as part of the Center for Creative Leadership, which is an organization that is a great resource for anybody looking to have organizational development or any type of leadership development program. And there's a link here to the article, brand new article, or let's say revised article they put out on the blog, the 70-20-10 rule for leadership development. They break down everything of what that is, what is 70-20-10, what they intended it to be, is based on the original research. And so if you look at it from that perspective, the idea of 70-20-10 means that if you're running your training program from an organizational strategic perspective, then 70% of the interactions will be challenging assignments and on the job assignments, challenging experiences and assignments. i.e., someone has to, you're going to be a brand new manager. So now you're going to work with a team in another division and implement a new system. And that could be an off brand sort of, off your field comfort type thing. So obviously, there's going to be quite a bit of learning involved there from a leadership perspective, because again, 70-20-20 is a leadership framework. It challenges folks to exercise the capability for influencing others and getting buy-in. Then we get to the 20% is the developmental relationships. So yes, if you're working on a project, you probably experienced this before. You're going to work with people that you met for your meeting for the first time. They work in another area of the organization, and therefore you're going to develop some sort of. I mean, if you're smart about this, you're going to develop a good relationship, good connections, good networking, which is essential for anyone's career in any organization. And then you got 10% coursework and training. So 70-20-10, drives to that. There have been other ideas about this, and the ratios have been disputed, and people think it, discussions that have been about learning and development, span back 8-10 years on what, it's not 70-20-10. It's maybe there's another piece of research out there for 3-33, which divides things equally. And I mean, this is just going to, if for anyone new in the system, we're going to be confusing. There is a PDF that was published by Steph Scott, content and lead researcher, editor, and Oren Ferguson, product development director from the. It's called a Good Practice Research Paper, New Perspectives on 70-20-10. And they do a good job actually breaking down the whole, let's say, back and forth that we talk about, mentioning also the 333 framework and where all this comes from. There is actually mention of several practitioners that you may recognize out there or in blogs, but that's mostly what you're going to see about 70-20-10. Outside of the research, of the actual research that comes from the fruits of, it turns out to be the result of this book. Everything else is made up. There's no actual evidence that is provided. There's a ton of marketing provided, and a ton of very appealing marketing sort of fluff or conversations with that. And we're not going to get into the fact that there's actually, there's a 70-20-10 institute that was formed and all of that. So that's what 70-20-10 is, and is technically for many respects a myth, because the actual research from lessons of experience never got into this whole 70-20-10 thing. It is not a mention there specifically. And that's the interesting part of what we find on everything else, right? So it's it's a matter of the original source. It's almost like a game of telephone every time when we talk about learning and development. The original idea here is that, look, it's a specific audience. We're talking about managers, senior executives, development senior executives from the level of supervisor up. That doesn't mean you're going to grab now the 70-20-10 and apply it to high school students who just came out and they are in an apprenticeship program, except the fact that we have to focus not so much on, 70-20-10, what a great idea, is the idea of training people and equipping them with skills. Even if you think about it, we have already strong evidence of that going back to our episodes. If you go to the first episode of this podcast, which brings you the book, The Instructor, the Man, and the Job by Charles R. Allen. I know I mentioned this a lot, but really, if you go back and take a look at it, it pretty much breaks down how proper training should be done, which is at the place of work with support from people that are experts in their job area, and with repeated exposure, with repeated coaching and feedback, and learning in the production environment. I mean, this was said, proposed, and promoted in 1919, And then if you go back to TWI in 1940, that's even way improved from that period. So the TWI program, which led to the movement of lean, is what really breaks down this whole thing because it incorporates not only the cognitive skill stuff or the experiential stuff, it also harnesses it into the affective, emotional type thing. So the well-being of the employee and also different things. You got to think that if you put, we're not all standard. We're not a cookie set. We're not all cookie cut people. In some level, we can say yes, we all have a brain, but that's pretty much it. I mean, that's the commonality that we may have. In many other respects, we have different inclinations, different experiences, different sets. The way I look at things, the way I approach learning, it's different from yours. And also that relates then to the capacity of people that people have in the workplace. So yes, experiences are good. Guided experiences better with coaching and feedback. Those are great. And that's really the essence of the 70-20-10 framework, but it's not some kind of model that was developed for a universal approach. Taking it as an idea, great, that's good. It could be a great idea. Sure, let's make it as experiential as possible. Let's not get people in 4 days in a classroom getting drilled on by some facilitator or trainer, and there's a difference in that, and we'll get into that into the next episode. But a trainer instructor would just deliver content and not really have any experiential practice. Some of the practice may be very, not relevant to the job. And it's not, regardless of the case, is never going to be the actual job experience. So that's where 70-20-10, instead of an idea or strategy, makes sense, has merit, because you want to have people learn how to do their job by doing their job. So the best way you can figure out from a training and development perspective of how not to get in the way of that, but actually enable that, it would be great. Now, a lot of the people that do performance and improvement and whatnot, they always recite the same chant, oh yeah, you don't need a course, you need a job aid. People can just do things with a job aid. Well, yeah, in some respect, but guess what? Those are just elements and tools that can be used for performance. A job aid is useless if people do not use it. So the problem there is not that the job aid doesn't exist or exists, is that people are not using it. And you might get into these conversations, these ideal conversations of 70-20-10, just because of that fact. The fact that you can say, well, I created a job aid, I created a course. Why are you doing your job? Well, that's the behavioral part of it. What is the person? How are we guiding this person through the job scenario? Some people will get instruction, know where to get it, do it individually, self directed, no issues. But many other people will not do that. Many other people will actually just wait for their manager or leader to tell them what to do. Many other people may also not want to do what it needs to be done. So there's that little bit of that gray area where the organization needs something to be done in a specific way to be congruent to its operations and to be effective. And then you need to get the people to do that. Some people will do that, some people won't. And that's the challenge that we have in learning and development. That's part of that development piece, and it's also part of that learning piece. So 70-20-10, besides that, I mean, if you go Google it, you're going to find tons of articles that are going to refer to the sources that I mentioned that come afterwards, 30 years afterwards. And there's even mention of Jay Cross, rest in peace. Ray J. Cross was a big proponent of informal learning. Absolutely. I mean, informal learning is meaning not getting stuck in a classroom and not experiencing the workplace. It's not good. Yeah, that just you should eliminate as much as that as you can. The trick is what we did. The lessons that we can learn from 1919 and from 1940 on the first few episodes here of the podcast, where we got people to do the job and we taught them the job in the spot. And yes, at the time, there was no internet and there was not overload of information and everything else. But really, we can't just use that as an excuse. As a matter of fact, you can consider it to be an advantage because now you have the ability to provide more guided information or more specific information with that. I think the main thing is that we have to step away from being a school format, a school base organization, and be more centered around what are the specific job competencies and what are the specific tasks that need to be accomplished in the job. Otherwise, you can't really measure things, and you will always be talking about the ether of learning throughout the organization. All right, that is it for this Sunday. Thank you for listening, and make sure you comment anywhere you can comment if you would like to have a specific topic cover in that relates that is important to you and it's something you'd like to learn more about.